All right, so I do want to welcome you here today to our Recharge Your Motivation workshop. So this is, I believe, the fourth Recharge workshop that the Learning Commons has offered so far. We've offered everything from summary skills for English classes to math test taking skills. And today, as we have approached and as we move past midterms, we thought that it would be very fitting to talk about motivation because it's very easy to, as we will see, have a decline in our motivation as we leave the midterm and enter into the end of the semester. So once again, I want to welcome you here. My name is Sam and I am an academic coach at the Learning Commons. I work with students on many areas of academic goals and skills, such as test-taking skills, study skills, and academic motivation is a big piece of all of that as well. So let's go ahead and just get started. So before we really dive into ways to improve your motivation, I think that it is important that we define what motivation is. And so motivation is the reason for one's actions, the reasons for their behavior, and the reasons for their goals. And overall, it's one's general willingness to do something or to complete a task. The biggest reason motivation is so important is that it pushes us forward when things get tough or when things start to get difficult, or maybe you find something boring or that you keep doing the same thing over and over again. Maybe things become monotonous, or perhaps it's even an unpleasant task. So some tasks, maybe writing a paper isn't your favorite thing in the world, but we do have to do it from time to time. And motivation is that piece that drives us. And it's different for each and every person here, including myself. So I'd like for you to take a moment at this point to think about how motivated, how academically motivated you currently feel. If you were to rate your motivation on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, so you can see the sad face on the slide, you know, if we were to consider that a 1, and then 5 being the highest, the smiley face on the slide, what would it be? I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. You know, really consider this. How motivated are you academically at this very moment? And then we'll go ahead and review those results once you've answered the question. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling now. As you can see, 3 is where you're at right now, and that's totally fine. As you will find as we continue on in this presentation, that is very normal. And actually, I would say probably above average, above where a lot of students are right now. So let's go ahead and take a look at the lifespan of fall motivation. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that this is not based on research, but really my own observations of working with college students over 6 years and my own experience of being a college student myself. So I don't know if you are aware of this, but in addition to working full-time here at Tallahassee Community College, I'm also a college student over at Florida State. And so I have this unique perspective of being able to see into both sides, both the student and someone who works at a college and works with students. So I definitely know the struggles that students are facing. As I said, this is based on my own observations and from what students have told me, but motivation is typically at its highest at the beginning of the semester. As we approach test number 1, motivation is typically still pretty high. Maybe it's decreased a little bit, but it's still pretty high at that point. As we reach midterms, and really right after midterms, this point right now, this is typically when motivation is pretty low. You know, you have just gotten through probably some major tests, major projects, major papers, and motivation is likely a little bit lower than it normally is. As you approach finals, it does get a little bit higher, and we'll talk about the reason for that in just a moment. And then it is at its lowest probably when it's the most important as we are approaching the holidays, which means finals week. So we're going to go through each of these one by one to talk about why it's the case that motivation is either high or low at these times. So I have observed that motivation is its highest at the beginning of the semester. Do you agree with me that typically at the beginning of the semester you feel the most motivated? Awesome, yes. So this is how I feel as well. There is typically a lot of excitement to start new classes. For many students, it is a fresh start. Perhaps there were some mistakes made last semester. Maybe you didn't do as well as you had hoped. Maybe you procrastinated a whole lot more than you really wanted to. But a new semester and new classes means a fresh start. And so students oftentimes start the semester feeling very optimistic. They think about all of these changes that they want to make in their schedule and the way they go about their work. They set new goals and they really tell themselves, I'm going to do things differently this time. Also, motivation is high because the first few classes that you go to are actually not all that challenging. Usually the first time you go to class, you go over the semester, it's a real introduction to the material. Sometimes you have easier assignments, so you'll be asked to complete an introduction discussion board, or maybe you'll complete a quiz that you find pretty simple. So you haven't gotten into some of the more difficult material yet, and it really keeps you motivated. Motivation is at its second highest as you approach test number 1. So at this point, it's a little bit lower than it was at the beginning because the excitement of a new semester does start to wear off. You're starting to fall into your habits. You've sort of gotten into a routine at this point. Typically, it's about 4 weeks into the semester, so a month in. And the important thing to note is that when you have your habits and your routines that you really set into, these could be good or bad. So you could go in with the best of intentions saying, I'm not going to put off my work. I'm going to make sure it's all done ahead of time. Well, sometimes things don't go as planned. And so at this point, you've sort of built in a routine of, all right, I'm going to dedicate Thursdays and Fridays to this class. And that could be, good or bad. However, you're still feeling pretty optimistic at this point. You've got a lot of momentum going. You could be going to class, you're taking notes, you're studying, you're really preparing for that first test. But this is also a time when students are typically resistant to help. You want to figure it out on your own, and that's all right. At this point, if I were to ask a student, hey, how's it going? Are you struggling with anything? Can I help you with anything? I would say 9 times out of 10, the student would say, nope, everything's good. Don't need anything. Everything is going great. But things change pretty quickly after that. So after you received your first test grade back and you start to approach midterms, or perhaps even you've taken your midterm, your motivation does start to get lower. And let me tell you why. So first, that momentum that you had at the beginning of the semester, it is typically gone at this point. You've been working pretty hard for about 7 or 8 weeks straight, and those routines that you've made are pretty solid. At this point in the semester, it is a make or break type of moment. As you reach October, which I mean, it's a perfect time for this workshop because here we are. This is a make or break moment. You can either decide right now that you are going to increase that motivation and keep that momentum going so that you can continue and succeed in your classes, or you could really not do so well, and it could be that break moment where you don't do so well in your classes. So October, the month of October, can really make a huge difference for students. This is typically when classes are getting a little bit more difficult. There is an increased frequency in which assignments are due. So you might feel like assignments are coming up much faster. You've got to complete them faster. There are so many more of them. The material might be a little bit more challenging at this point. And then some students find that their grades might not reflect the amount of effort they feel like they've put into the course so far. And that's why many students do consider withdrawing from classes at this point, despite there still being a chance to really succeed and meet their goals in the class. However, because motivation is low, the students may not really see a reason to continue. And for those who do make it through this point, so once they get through this low motivation point, they find that there is an increase in motivation right around the corner that keeps them going. So if you can really make it through this time, you can make it through the end of the semester. Like I said, right around the corner, you've got a little bit higher motivation as you approach finals. So think of this as being around the end of October. So we're almost through that low point for motivation for now. But as we approach the end of October, that motivation does start to rise. Motivation does start to creep back in. And this is typically due to a willingness for students to mix things up, try new things. Maybe they realized that something didn't work for them the first or second time around. Maybe you had a study method that you were using and you really found that by the time you approached midterms, it really wasn't working out. And so you know something has to change as you do make it to finals. And so you may decide to look up new ways to study. You may seek assistance from tutoring or any of the other of these support resources that are available to you. And students often at this point do find that new motivation and determination to pass their classes. And it could be that you're reminded of the goals that you set for yourself at the very beginning. So perhaps you entered into your class at the beginning of the term feeling really excited and saying, I want to get an A or a B in this math class. Well, when motivation does hit that low spot, you're probably saying to yourself, well, I'll just be happy if I pass the class. As you approach finals and you realize, really where you're at, those goals solidify and you realize, all right, I set a goal for myself. I'm going to go for it. I'm determined and I'm going to make it through. When you start preparing for finals, typically you'll start taking notes again, because when motivation's low, I think notes are sometimes the first thing to go. You just sort of go to class and passively listen. Maybe you'll jot down a few things, but those notes definitely aren't as detailed as they were at the beginning of the semester. Well, as you approach finals and that motivation increases, you may start taking notes again, filling out different study guides. And this is also a time when you are most likely to really reach out to your professor, a peer, a tutor, a coach for support. So you are at this point very willing to reach out to any support that's available to you to help you reach that initial goal. However, once we hit November and then going into December, I say that this is the danger zone for motivation. So in November, we do have the Veterans Day break. We also have the Thanksgiving holiday. And then in December, there's that anticipation for winter break. And it comes very quickly. It's like once November 1st hits, everything goes by so fast. And what that does is it gives you a break from your routine. And what happens when you have a break from your routine is that it's really difficult to get back on your routine. And while that break is probably very well deserved, you're almost there at the end. And so stay the course, don't give up. When motivation is low around the holidays, it's really, really easy to procrastinate. Take your eye off the prize and really start to slip back into those old habits, but don't do it. You're almost there, the end is in sight. So the real question is, what motivates you? And you can think of this on your own, but only you can define what motivates you. No one can tell you what motivates you except yourself. Only you know what you want, need, and feel. And so there are really two different types of motivators that you could have for yourself. And those are intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Now, if you've taken a college success class, you probably know all about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic is that motivation that originates within yourself, and there are really three big intrinsic motivators. They are autonomy. This is being able to control your own life. Mastery in a subject, so always wanting to improve upon yourself. And then purpose. That's where your goals come in. Why does all of this matter? Then there's also intrinsic motivation, and that is motivation that exists outside of yourself. There's some sort of external or outside factor that really determines why you're motivated. And so this could be the need for a career, a need for a job, pressure from the family, wanting to make someone proud, avoiding judgment, or really earning a reward. So if your only reason for being enrolled in college is for that piece of paper at the end, then we can consider that an award and maybe an external motivator. Now, it's probably very common for you to hear that, internal or intrinsic motivation is good and external or extrinsic motivation is bad. And I don't think that this is the case at all. I think that both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation are good forms of motivation. And I think that all of us have a mix of both intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation when we're getting things done. Intrinsic motivation, of course, is best, but having extrinsic motivators is not a bad thing. It actually can be a good thing. You should probably think of your intrinsic motivations as your primary motivator. So you definitely need to have intrinsic motivation. You have to have something that originates within yourself in order to keep you going when challenges do arise. Because if we rely only on those extrinsic motivators, it's likely to fall apart on us eventually, because in the end, it's not what you truly wanted, it's what you wanted from someone else, perhaps acceptance from someone else, or sometimes you can bargain with yourself and say, I really just wanted that diploma at the end, and maybe I don't need it for the career that I want. So, you could start making bargains if it's just extrinsic motivation. You really want to have that intrinsic to fall back on when things get tough. So because intrinsic motivation is our primary type of motivator, I think that's what we're going to focus on here, are those strategies that can help you increase your intrinsic motivation. Remember that right now we may be at a low point in motivation. So I know when you filled out the poll, you said you were at about a 3. So I hope that you can use these strategies as we do approach our new high point after we get through to the end of October and as you continue through the semester. So one way to do this is to use positive self-talk. So this is really paying attention to the way that you talk to yourself and really picking out when you are using negative self-talk. So when you're talking about yourself, your intelligence, your knowledge, or skill in a negative or helpless way. So there's something called a self-fulfilling prophecy, this idea that if you tell yourself you can't do something, then you're right. There's going to be something in you that is going to stop you from putting all of that motivation in to succeed. And so you can see the cycle on the slide. You've got your self-talk. If that's positive, it's going to positively influence your motivation. And then that's going to positively influence your success. And so what you should do is to turn all of those negative feelings and that negative self-talk into positive self-talk. And I'll give you an example of that right now. So it's very common for a student to come into my office and for us to talk about a math class, for example. And the student will say something along the lines of, I hate math. I've always struggled with math. I'm not a math person. I just am really terrible at math. And you may feel similarly about math or maybe another subject, maybe you don't. But this is something that I will commonly hear from students. And what I ask them for them to do is to sort of turn that on its head. Those are very negative statements about yourself. And so instead, I ask them, instead of saying, this is too hard, or I'm not a math person, to say, this is challenging. This is a challenge for me. I'm learning. I might make mistakes, but at least that means that I'm trying and I'm learning. All of those are very positive ways to talk about struggles and maybe roadblocks that you're experiencing, but it doesn't limit you from increasing that motivation and understanding that you have the ability to learn and have the ability to grow, which is all a part of something called a growth mindset. It's this belief in oneself that you have the ability to grow and you have the ability to change. So I went ahead and I launched the second poll here. Go ahead and select all of the statements that currently describe your mindset. Now you can select multiple on here, but you will find that there are answers that go along with a growth mindset, and there are answers that go along with something called a fixed mindset. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a moment to fill that out now. Awesome. Thank you so much for filling out that poll. So I see a lot of good stuff here, a lot of things that show that you have a growth mindset, but then there are some areas in which you may have a fixed mindset. So some of the evidence that shows that one has a growth mindset is embracing challenges, persisting in the face of setbacks, seeing effort as the path to success, really learning from feedback, and then finding inspiration from others who have been successful. Now, there's also something called a fixed mindset, and this is the idea that our intelligence and our knowledge is something that is fixed. We cannot change it. It's something that sort of remains the same throughout our entire lives. And so when people say things like, I'm just bad at math, that's evidence of a fixed mindset. And for someone who has a fixed mindset, they may avoid challenges. They might give up easily. They might see effort as not worth their time. They might ignore negative but useful feedback. And then they often feel a little bit threatened by the success of others. And so those are all evidence of a fixed mindset. So you really want to work on cultivating and really cherishing all that we have in growth mindset. Because remember, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Remember that self-fulfilling prophecy again. If you tell yourself that you can't do something, then it's likely right. You probably won't put the motivation, you won't have the motivation to get through it, and it's going to impact your success and your results. I'd like for you to take a moment. Goals are also a really big part of what keep us motivated. And I'm not going to ask you about these goals right now, but it is something that you might want to consider for yourself. Where do you see yourself tomorrow? What are the daily goals that you have for yourself? Where do you see yourself next week? So what's your weekly goal? Where do you see yourself in December? So at the end of the semester, where do you want to be? And then where do you see yourself in 5 years? I know that's like a huge, gigantic question and you might not have all the answers, but it does show that you should have both short-term and long-term goals. So set and remind yourself of these daily, weekly, semesterly, and long-term goals. And remember that if you are struggling right now, or if you're finding something challenging, that this is just one hurdle and one setback that is going to take you one step closer to your goal once you are through it this semester. Another great way to stay motivated is to write a letter to your future self. So in this letter, it doesn't have to be very long. It can actually be very short, but you just want to remind yourself of your short-term and your long-term goals, why you're here at TCC, why you're taking the classes that you're taking, why are you here? Why have you decided to pursue an education? And what do you want to be proud of accomplishing at the end of the semester? You can write this at any time. You can write it at the beginning of the semester, or you could write it towards the middle and then have it delivered to yourself at the end of the term in December. there is a website, it's called futureme.org. You can type out your letter and then you can have it sent to yourself through email on the date that you give. So if you are interested in writing a letter to your future self, that might be a good website to check out. All right, so next we are going to talk about distractions and rewards, both of which are very important when it comes to motivation. Distractions can really limit our motivation. And so by eliminating or limiting those distractions, you're going to be better off. That might mean needing to turn off the phone for a little bit. You might have to turn off the TV or radio if you find those distracting. You might need to study alone or in a quiet space if you find that being around others distracts you. But the big thing here is that if you do know that you're struggling with distractions, sometimes just writing those distractions down and coming up with a plan, and you actually have to then follow through with the plan, can help. So if you say, all right, when I have my friends around, that's a distraction for me, and so that has to be a no work time. Or if I know that social media is a distraction for me, then I might say when I'm studying, I have to put my phone in another room so that I can't access it at that point. Sometimes writing down that plan helps you with the follow through. Rewards are also a very important piece of what keeps us motivated. So each time you accomplish some sort of daily or weekly goal, you earn a good grade, you submit a paper that you're feeling really proud about, go ahead and reward yourself. Those rewards can range from something that is really small to something that is large, but it needs to be appropriate for the size of the accomplishment. So if you accomplish something very small, so say you've written one discussion board post, that doesn't mean that you should, do an all expenses paid trip to the Bahamas at that point. Like, that would not be an appropriate sized reward for what you've accomplished. But if you do accomplish a small goal, definitely go ahead and reward yourself in some small way. It could be giving into your distractions for a half hour and then getting back to work. On the flip side, if you accomplish something very large, then you do want to give yourself an appropriately large size reward. Now, I'm not going to tell you what's a good reward and what's a bad reward, because what one person finds rewarding might not be what another person finds rewarding. So what I find rewarding might not be the same for you. So you really should determine what those rewards are going to be, and then definitely reward yourself when you need to. Self-care is also a big piece of staying motivated. So this isn't just, taking a bubble bath and putting on a face mask. This is, very basic. Make sure that you're getting sleep. Make sure you're getting enough sleep at night, that you are getting 7 to 8 hours per night if possible, that you create a daily routine if you can. So I really like having a nighttime routine. I like having a bedtime or knowing that I have to be asleep by a certain time, because then I can get to sleep and know that I'm well rested in the morning. Having healthy habits is also very helpful. This can help you better prioritize your tasks, keep your eye on the prize. And it's also very important when struggling with motivation that you don't isolate yourself, and that you do reach out for help when it is needed. Make sure that you are taking enough time for yourself and that you are kind to yourself as well. So engaging in that positive self-talk, because that can have a huge impact on your self-esteem as well. So I'll ask now, this could be a rhetorical question, you don't have to answer it, but I would like for you to consider at this point, how do you plan to recharge your motivation? You might be, in the middle right now, but hopefully you've learned about a few strategies that can help you or remind you why you're doing this in the first place, why you're here, why you're enrolled in classes, and why this is so important. And hopefully when things do get tough, or you do feel that your motivation is starting to slip, you can remind yourself of those things and persist and keep going. So I do want to thank you for coming today. That is going to be the end of my presentation. If you do have any questions, you can put that in the chat right now. I'm happy to answer those questions. Otherwise, you are free to go. I do have my contact information on this slide here. So if you do end up having any questions, just let me know. I'll also be sending an email to you this afternoon with a link to a feedback survey. So if you could let me know how the presentation was, that is only going to help me make this even better the next time that I offer it, likely next semester. So once again, I want to thank you for watching today, and just let me know if there are any questions. You're welcome. Have a wonderful day.